When you talk about bumping a player, it's pretty much
great courage. One that says the bump is dead, that's how you deliver it.
What is going on, YouTube universe? My name is Trent and welcome to the Hip and Shoulder, where we discuss everything Australian rules football. And today, I would normally say welcome to another edition of the Round Recap podcast, but I'm thinking it's time that we probably renamed it to something like Better Late Than Never podcast or About Fucking Time podcast, because before we dive into the podcast to cover the action of round 18, we have to rewind and go back to round 17. Still playing catch up. I'm feeling a lot better now and sick at the time, so kind of put it on the back burner. So there's been a couple of weeks where we've doubled down on a podcast, and that is what we are doing today. Something I want to ask you guys at home as well. Do you think this is a podcast that I should start translating into an audio only format and start uploading to Spotify and other, podcast kind of channels and apps and that kind of thing? Let me know in the comments down below if that's something you would like to see, something a little bit more accessible to a wider audience, I suppose, instead of looking for a podcast, pertaining to just the YouTube format. I would love to know your feedback on that. But as I said, we have to rewind 2 weeks. Let's go back to round 17, and round 17 was clouded in probably the most controversy we have had to come out of the season so far, given the fact that we have now a Brownlow fancy officially rubbed out of the running, and it has caused a lot of debate. We will get to that particular game later on in this podcast, and there is also some touching points throughout that kind of draw comparisons to that moment, and I think it continues to show the inconsistencies within the AFL's rulings and the MRO and how the tribunal is handled, and just the shit show that has been the AFL this year. I've tried so hard over the last couple of weeks to kind of steer my direction away from talking about umpiring decisions on the field, how the game is officiated on and off the field, but it was hard, especially in the last couple of weeks, to not do so. And I'm gonna kind of pre-surface that now, because in the next podcast, when we cover round 18, there is going to be more controversy to discuss that kind of parallels those inconsistencies. Yet again, shocker, I know, but unfortunately that has been the tale of the tape for 2024, and until the AFL takes any responsibility, we're going to be left in a state where I feel the game is only going to continue to decline on and off the field. I've made numerous comments over social media over the last couple of weeks saying that the AFL will continue to be a circus as long as clowns are running it, and I think that is the perfect summation of where we are at right now, despite Andrew Dillon coming out and saying that he feels that the umpiring and the state of the umpiring is as good as it's been. I still question that comment so much. And then this, just Laura coming on, and is her name Laura? I even don't fucking know, because she hasn't really had that much positive impact on the game, and could be Lauren. I don't fucking know, the new bitch that they brought in and has done nothing but kind of polarize the game in negative ways. That bitch? Yeah, that bitch. That's the bitch I'm talking about. But let's put a hold on that. I don't want to talk about that any more than we need to. We've got a full round to get on into before I sit down and start recording the next one, and I want to bang them out because I'm feeling good, I'm feeling great, and I don't want to have the AFL and the umpiring fraternity bring me down. Okay, so round 17, we look back in reflection, kicked off with what I thought was game of the round in many retrospects. We had Collingwood taking on Essendon at the MCG. Two teams with a lot on the line. Collingwood, obviously a very shaky start to their premiership reign, and they've managed to come back and stay within, I wouldn't say premiership contention, but at least finals contention at this stage. Given that they have had a very similar season to Richmond, both teams absolutely decimated by injury, almost every week another player in and out. They haven't been able to truly have their best 22, best 23 available collectively at one given time. And the difference being, however, Richmond's had that huge drop-off. Collingwood has still managed to turn their season around somewhat and still remain in the hunt, which I think is very impressive given the injuries they have been smacked with all year this year. On the flip side of things, we have Essendon, who are shaping up for a top 4 finish. I personally don't think they will finish in top 4. I think they're going to finish either 5th or 6th. Probably within their best interest to finish outside of the 4 anyway, because I would hate to finish 4th and have to play against Sydney in Sydney round 1 of the finals. I would rather play at home, MCG, against a Bulldogs or a Gold Coast or a team like that that's going to be a little bit out of their depth. There was a lot on the line, more so in this game, I feel, for Essendon, and I've been very bullish on Essendon all year. It has caused more than many confusing and aggravating conversations with some Essendon supporting friends that I have. I still feel, when you look at the breakdown of the wins that they have had this year, most of the wins have come from the bottom 5 teams in the competition. Now, looking at that in isolation, you do have other teams like Brisbane, for example, who have won the same amount of games against contesting teams than Essendon. I think maybe Brisbane have won 1 extra game more. And, you know, conversation can start coming around. You know, everyone's talking about Essendon's soft run. What about Brisbane? What about this team? What about this team? I think what is more concerning is not the teams that Essendon have beaten, but the teams that Essendon have failed to beat. And those teams have been those contending teams. Now, they've defeated GWS. They've defeated the Bulldogs, I believe. They've defeated another couple that are kind of thereabouts, but not the teams that we expect to be locked in for finals. We're talking Geelong, we're talking Sydney, we're talking Carlton, Fremantle, you know, those kind of I think they have beaten Fremantle. I could be wrong. I'd have to look through the fixture to determine that. But what I'm trying to say is, when it came to this game, this was a game where Essendon had to come out and win and prove a lot of naysayers wrong. And it wasn't going to be an instant fix. It was never going to be Essendon win this and then everybody suddenly believes. But this is the game that sets up that run home to show that they have capabilities of winning their first final in God knows how long. And they came out and played a great game of football. They played a really good game. Had they been accurate, they could have blown Collingwood dead out of the water early. And when you break down how the game played out, it looked like it was game over at quarter time. You have Collingwood leading 5-2 to 2-5. Then again, Essendon's inaccuracy we have seen this year have let them down early. If they had shot straight, it could have been only a couple of points either side of the contest. It gets back to half time, and Essendon stem it back, and we are looking forward to a brilliant second half, because we go from 32 plays 17 at quarter time to 52 plays 44. We're down to 8 points, and Essendon, we know, are one of those teams that once they get that momentum going this year, they are very hard to stop. But we know Collingwood play exactly the same, and when you get that Collingwood crowd behind you, they are near impossible to stop. And we know how Collingwood perform naturally over the last couple of years when it comes to those close finishing games. We know they're able to lock down those teams. You know, they've got really deep skill when it comes to clutch moments and being able to just switch it on at the right time. We move on to 3-quarter time, and Essendon put the foot down in an emphatic way in that third quarter, moving from 6-8 to 10-12, with Collingwood only managing to put 3 behinds on the scoreboard, coughing up 4-4. That could have been game over at 3-quarter time had those 4 behinds, even 2 of those behinds, been a couple of goals more. And again, Essendon find themselves in a position where if their accuracy wasn't so wayward, they would have a better percentage, which would help them a lot on the ladder, especially with a ladder that is so contested at this point in time. But they would be putting teams like Collingwood away early, and this is where I still kind of have a little bit of argument within myself as to whether or not Essendon are a contender or a pretender. I don't know where they sit in that list yet. I'm still not fully convinced, even though this game coming down to the wire, Essendon go on to kick another 20 points for the rest of the game. Collingwood, however, come out and they kick 35 or 25 and they really pushed them to the limit. And there were certain periods of time where I thought Collingwood were really going to get back into this game, but then Essendon would find a way to answer back. And it was the resilience of Essendon to really push Collingwood to the absolute limit that I was impressed with the most. But again, it was a standard that they kind of set that I feel that they have to follow through with moving forward. And knowing where we're going to be talking about the Round 18 podcast moving forward, it's kind of a bit of a letdown to see them perform this well and then know how they're going to perform the following week when we talk about that in the next podcast. Collingwood, on the other hand, I think they have fallen drastically to the fact that, again, and I draw comparisons to Richmond only because the injury lists are so similar and the circumstances around certain positions missing is so similar. Their forward structure has been completely broken. And one of my best mates is an avid Collingwood supporter, and I was even saying to him only just last week gone after the Round 18 game, what is letting Collingwood down so much is their inability to field a forward six that has cohesive chemistry and work together so well, like a well-oiled engine, because they haven't had the pieces for that engine together cohesively, if that makes sense. They've got Dan McStay, they trade for him. He doesn't have many injuries while playing at Brisbane. He comes to Collingwood and then all he's done is sit the game out. He does come back for round 18. We will discuss that in the next video, but still having somebody that is brought in as a big-bodied key forward and not having him readily available hurts. Brody Myercheck, in and out of the team all year with injury. Jamie Elliott, in and out of the team with some conjecture for a period of time around whether or not he would even play football again because of the heart-related issues he was apparently having. You know, Beau McCreary, in and out of the team. Lachie Schultz, you know, his form, waivers. Bobby Hill, his form, waivers. Questions are now being asked on whether trading out Jack Ginnivan and giving away, I think it was pick 7 in the end for Lachie Schultz is becoming a detriment to Collingwood, because when you compare Lachie Schultz's year to Ginnivan's year, Ginnivan has had the much better year comparatively. And you know, it's a worry, because when Collingwood get the ball forward, they don't have the tall timber all the time to pluck those marks and kick those goals. They've had to shift when Jeremy Howe is fit and playing up into the forward line because they need a big-bodied player to be able to clunk marks. Mason Cox, as much as I have been on his case for years, has been missing from this Collingwood unit, because while he is a big, dopey bastard and a lot of people can make many memes about him, he can test the ball. He brings it down to ground. He can take big marks. Whether he's consistent enough to do it every week is another question, but he is still there to provide a contest. That is where the communication breakdown in that forward half is breaking, and it allows defences, just like it did with Essendon in this particular game, to rebound that ball out of that forward 50 into their own forward 50 so incredibly quickly. And I think that is where the breakdown has come from. We can talk about the defensive breakdown of Collingwood all we want. I still argue Nathan Murphy's retirement from this team has hindered Collingwood more than people are giving credit to, because Izak Rankine now has to play kind of a different game to what he's used to playing. Darcy Moore now plays more one-on-one, doesn't go up as a third man for that intercept mark. So I feel the abruptness of that retirement kind of threw a spanner in the works, because they didn't really have that replacement ready. Like, Charlie Dean's been very serviceable in that role, but he's not a Nathan Murphy. But at the end of the day, Essendon pick up a good win. Hopefully they can start stringing wins like this together on the run home, because that is their win con to play finals this year. Collingwood, on the other hand, can't afford to let games like this slip, because they are still very much at risk of missing the top 8 completely after being the most dominant team in the AFL last year by a long way. When it came to deciding the 3-2-1 best on ground for this game, it was incredibly difficult for me to kind of pick players out. And if you were checking this podcast out for the first time, I have been doing a running tally each and every week, similar to a Brownlow vote system with a 3 vote, 2 vote, 1 vote, which I'm dubbing the Hip and Shoulder MVP award. You know, it's something the players are never going to see. It is something, you know, that is never going to be nationally recognized, and I'm not doing it for that. I'm doing it so myself, as an avid AFL supporter, has the chance to sit down, break every game down, and kind of pick out who I think has been the better performance over each week. And it gives us, you know, myself and you guys watching, the chance to have a discussion in the comments down below if you agree or disagree, and we can talk about how certain players have been performing this year, if they've been underperforming. I love creating conversation, and I feel the MVP award is going to do that moving forward. You know, I've seen other channels and groups that have kind of popped up where they do best on ground for their team only, like the Hoops show. They do their Geelong best on ground. There's other channels that kind of do their own thing as well, but I thought a more collective and broader AFL kind of take on it would be better than just myself sitting down here every week and talking about who I think the best Richmond player is, because I think that would get a little bit drab after a little while. So again, came down to this game, and there are going to be players that miss that I think a lot of people will be pissed about, because the 3-2-1 I give this week actually do go to 3 Essendon players. I have left some Collingwood players out that probably should have been in the mix. I do have arguments for it, and I will make those arguments clear in a moment. I think the biggest omission for me is Steele Sidebottom. He had 34 disposals on the night. 26 of those 34 were effective. He ran at 76.5% disposal efficiency, 8 contested, but when we know Sidebottom isn't a contested ball winner, he's an outside ball winner on that wing. He gained 513 metres with those 34 disposals. He had 2 clearances, took 11 marks, had 7 score involvements, and laid 2 tackles. So defensively, he was a little bit down on what we're used to seeing, but still seeing him use the ball effectively forward half, setting up goals and getting his teammates involved. Some would argue Nick Dacos would probably, you know, be in the mix here as well, but he had 31 disposals, and while 17 of those were contested, he only ran at 41% disposal efficiency. He did have 12 clearances though, he had 3 score involvements, he laid 3 tackles, but this was by far, even though he had 31, probably one of the worst games he's had in a while because of that disposal efficiency truly letting him down. And probably the only other one I felt that could have been in the conversation is Jack Crisp. I thought his game was pretty big early, especially kicking those first 3 goals that he did. He ended up on 24 disposals at 70% disposal efficiency. 11 of those were contested for 510 metres gained. 5 clearances, 6 marks, 3 goals, 6 score involvements, and 4 tackles. However, I think it is hard to argue against the next 3 that I'm going to name, who I did give the 3-2-1 votes to, starting with the 1 vote this week. And it's a player that I don't usually talk much about because he's probably been thereabouts since being traded to Essendon. But I gave the 1 vote this week to Dylan Shiel. He had 26 disposals at 76% disposal efficiency. 12 of those were contested, 253 metres gained. 12 of those were handballs, so we're expecting some smaller handballs from Shiel. He did follow up, however, with 6 clearances and 5 marks, but it was the 7 score involvements, and namely the 8 tackles on the game, that got the 1 vote for me, because I feel defensively in a close contest, Dylan Shiel was shutting down a lot of those moments where Collingwood was coming and they needed somebody to put on that defensive pressure to shut a play down. Dylan Shiel was popping up and was being that man, and I really loved seeing how he went about it this particular game. The 2 vote I gave to Jai Caldwell. He's having somewhat of a year. He has just popped up out of absolutely nowhere. 30 disposals, 70% disposal efficiency, 14 were contested. He had 256 metres gained, 8 clearances, 6 marks, kicked the 1 goal, 7 score involvements, 7 tackles. He is an absolute pressure machine, and I was a little bit bullish on him when he first got traded because he wasn't really showing this kind of effort, but the work he has put in this year, especially in the back half, he could be the future of this club. I see him potentially being a future captain with the way he handles himself on the field. His defensive pressure is through the roof, and if you've been catching these podcasts before, you would know that I am somebody who really loves seeing a midfielder that is a complete player in the way of being both offensive and defensive, and he did that this week. He had the 30 touches, he kicks a goal, 7 score involvements, so he's getting his teammates involved, and he lays 7 tackles himself. So being able to have that defensive shutdown but also be an offensive threat, I think makes him a complete player. Speaking of complete players, and I still feel this player is incredibly underrated in the fact that when we're talking about All-Australian captaincy this year, when we're talking about the Brownlow, Zach Merrett's name has not been brought up enough. And while you could probably argue on form currently, Patrick Cripps is probably looking at All-Australian captaincy, I think Zach Merrett has every case to push for it, and I think he is still a Brownlow smoky because with all the wins Essendon have had, there's only probably 1 or 2 games so far where I think Zach might not get a vote, but I still think he would be in contention almost every week because when Essendon get up, it is on the back of monster efforts from this bloke. 30 disposals at 80% disposal efficiency. He had 10 contested possessions at 474 metres gained, 5 clearances, 6 marks, 1 goal, 4 tackles, but it was the 15 score involvements. This guy's ability to bring players into the game and really hold this captaincy to a whole new level is so inspiring to watch. I definitely think there's not enough people talking about this bloke, and I think there should be more because the games that he has strung together this year have been absolutely phenomenal. Saturday afternoon at Marvel Stadium, we had North Melbourne taking on the Gold Coast. Now, while I tipped the Gold Coast to win this, I did so in saying that North Melbourne would and could find this game incredibly winnable because they have been putting together a package of plays over the last month or so that has been really great to watch. And even though they haven't been getting the result they're looking for, you've been able to identify not just subtle improvements, but I think very strong improvements in the way they've been, transferring the ball from back half to forward half, the way they bring each other into the game, their defensive pressure around the ground. They've definitely been lifting. And something I've come to appreciate this season as a Richmond supporter, especially when you're supporting a team that is getting beaten every week or most weeks, you start looking for the small wins, and North Melbourne just haven't had, as I just said, those small wins. They've had some real big wins to pick out of it. And it's also a reflection on the Gold Coast as well, because the Gold Coast coming into this game, they might be undefeated at People's First Stadium and they outperform there, but on the road, they haven't won a game this year. So outside of the Gold Coast, they have been absolutely hopeless, and it was North Melbourne's opportunity to strike, and they struck true, coming home with a 4-point win in a very good contest and great showing from them. Definitely a better showing from them than the Gold Coast, and I thought, if anything, at quarter time, it was going to look like a landslide was about to come from the Gold Coast. 3 goals, 1 plays, 5 goals, 1. Okay, it's only a 2-goal lead to the Gold Coast heading into that first term, but we have seen in the past North Melbourne have a tendency to maybe drop heads a little bit. Gold Coast have been one of those teams that can move on with that momentum. Momentum, I think, is going to be the word of the day today, and get the ball rolling. But then we come to halftime, and North Melbourne take their game from 3 goals, 1 to 8 goals, 3. Gold Coast only managed themselves 2 goals, 1 for that quarter. And then moving on for the rest of the game, it was just a landslide from North Melbourne. They pushed their lead out at 3-quarter time to 13 points. And we knew the Gold Coast were going to fight hard, and we knew North Melbourne over the last month and a bit have been setting up defensive structures to play out these close games, because we have seen North Melbourne in situations where these close games have been lost. So it was very interesting to see how both teams went about it. And what was more interesting was the post-game press conference from Damien Hardwick, when he turned around and he said, just straight out to the things, that it's not fucking good enough. He dropped the F-bomb and he apologized for it, and I still feel it's a little bit wayward of the AFL to turn around and say that he shouldn't be sanctioned for that when Alistair Clarkson was overheard dropping the F-bomb by an umpire, and they wanted to sanction him and stop him from, coaching from the sidelines and confine him to a coach's box. So I think, again, we talk about that disparity in how the AFL is being handled. It plays in with the coaches as well as it does with the players. But North Melbourne picking up a big win, I thought it was great for the club, even though it pushes the fact more that Richmond probably are going to finish 18th this year, which is a bitter pill to swallow as a Richmond fan. But then when you think about it, Richmond are going to be in a position where they're probably going to bottom out for the next couple of years. Tasmania comes in a couple of years as well, so it's probably good for Richmond to be in this position where we're losing these players so we can get these early draft picks in. I still think I'm trying to look down the tunnel and see a light. So North Melbourne might be doing Richmond a favour here, I don't know. It's just great to see North Melbourne getting reward for effort, finally, after the months that we have seen of them starting to string some good football together. When it comes to deciding the 3-2-1 this week, probably a lot easier to do so, even though it was a close game, and you could probably make arguments for players like Noah Anderson, 30 disposals, 11 contested. However, he only ran at 43% disposal efficiency, which is down for him. Jai Simpkin had 28 disposals. He had 5 clearances, 6 marks, 6 score involvements, 5 tackles. It was a good game from him. Flanders had 27 at 70%, 6 clearances as well, managed to kick a goal. Matt Rowell, a little bit down again, only 24 disposals, 66% disposal efficiency. Matt Rowell hasn't had a good probably month and a bit. He has really dropped off after the form he started with. I would argue within the first 8 rounds, he was well within All-Australian contention. I think he might be getting to the point where he might even miss being a part of the 40-man squad. He has dropped off severely. 3-2-1 for me, I think, was quite clear-cut this week. It was just a matter of which order I stacked them in. And this was the order I went with. I gave the 1 vote to Colby McKercher, who has been out of the team for a little bit through injury, came back in with opportunity given that Zach Fisher is out, and Zach Fisher has been effectively playing the role that Colby McKercher was playing. He comes back with 37 disposals at 83% disposal efficiency. Now, out of those 37, 2 were contested, and I think he got a lot of 1-2s out of the defensive half, so that's why I didn't rate him as highly as the other 2 that I voted for. But he still had the 1 clearance, 6 marks, 5 score involvements, and the 1 tackle for the game. He could improve a little bit defensively. He also had 666 metres gained, which was huge. Obviously, he might not be that type of player to be a contested ball winner. He could be an outside player like a steel side bottom who's going to get fed the ball and is going to provide a lot of run, which is demonstrated by the metres gained for this game. The 2 vote this week, I wrestled so hard internally as to who I was going to give it to. I landed on Luke Davies-Uniacke. 30 disposals at 80% disposal efficiency, 12 contested for 439 metres gained, 9 clearances, 4 marks, 1 goal, 7 score involvements, and 3 tackles. Having a huge year, Luke Davies-Uniacke, and it's great to see him out on the park, not hindered by injury, and really being a part of the game that North Melbourne have really started to put together over the last 2 months. Best on ground for me could be arguably either of those 3. You could throw a blanket over the 3 of them, but I went with Harry Sheezel. 35 disposals at 74%, 14 contested for 372 metres gained, 10 clearances, 8 marks, 1 goal straight, 4 score involvements, 5 tackles. I thought, again, a player who is offensively sound, defensively sound, and I love the move from halfback to the midfield for Harry because, similar to Nick Dacos, play him off the halfback flank in the first year, get used to getting the ball in hand and transferring the ball to your teammates, throw him into the midfield, and he's become a different beast. And I love that he gets his hands on the ball, he's not scared to get down and dirty, he can float forward and kick goals. Everyone's talking about how good Nick Dacos is. I don't think enough people are talking about just how good Harry Sheezel is. Over at Adelaide Oval, Port Adelaide absolutely destroyed the Bulldogs, and I mean fucking had a field day. Quarter time, 5 goals 2 to 2 behinds. Half time, 10 goals 5 to 3 goals 3. Port Adelaide went on to kick. Unfortunately, it should have been a bigger blowout because they went on to kick 5 goals 7 for the rest of the game. And the Bulldogs went on to kick 5 goals 3. Yeah, the damage was done early. I mean, Bulldogs kind of matched them in the second half with, you know, only a couple of goals either side. But, yeah, I'm flabbergasted. I really am. This is a list, again, we have spoken about with the Bulldogs that is so stacked with talent, and we see them play games against some teams like Richmond earlier this year, like Essendon, you know, absolutely demoralise some teams. And then they come out against Port Adelaide, who is a side that has been thereabouts this year, and we have seen a huge drop-off in form. The Bulldogs able to really capitalise on that, and they get absolutely destroyed. I don't understand. I really do not. And this continues to be a trend as we move on to the next podcast that I put out, because you see a performance like this, and then you compare it to a performance that we see in round 18, and you ask where that effort is every week. It's really, it's so fucking frustrating as a neutral. It really is. This game had a lot of conjecture about it though, and I feel the conversation we need to have is about the substitution of Aaron Norton out of the team quite early, out with concussion from a knock from Zirk Thatcher, the Port Adelaide defender, traded from Essendon. Ball was kind of at half forward, getting ready to come into the forward line for the Bulldogs, and Zirk Thatcher throws an arm backwards, which connects with the head of Aaron Norton and hits him with enough force to concuss him. Does not even get cited by the MRO for a fine or anything of that nature at all. I want you guys to remember that as we move on, and I think you guys know where this is coming from, because I personally feel if we are seeing a player rubbed out for a Brownlow from a very similar act, then this player should have at least been cited, especially given Izak Heeney's situation didn't end up in a substitution where Zirk Thatcher's did. So, very interesting. And again, it shows the disparity in decision. I think there definitely needs to be an overhaul of the AFL just in general on the off-season, and that's probably wishful thinking because I know it's never going to happen. There really isn't anything else out of this game to report on, apart from the fact that Port Adelaide rocked up and absolutely put them to the fucking sword. It's no surprise that when you look at the effort from the Bulldogs this week that Adam Treloar again is mentioned. I mean, he only ran at 63% disposal efficiency, but he still had 38 disposals, 7 clearances, 7 tackles. Again, another player who is having an incredibly underrated year, and I feel should well and truly be within All-Australian contention, given the year he has had. But I think there might be other midfielders that are going to push him out because they've been better, which is really rough, because the year he has had, I think, is probably the best year he has had as a Bulldog by a country mile. Outside of that, there was huge disparity. I mean, Tom Liberatore only had 22, Bontempelli only had the 21, but I think he's starting to play a more forward sound kind of game, because we see him forward of the ball, kick 2 goals 3, so he's hitting the scoreboard, but he didn't have the impact in this game we're used to seeing. 52% disposal efficiency speaks volumes. So it was easy for me this week to pick out the 3-2-1. The glaring omission is probably Ollie Wines. He had 30 disposals at 73% disposal efficiency, 12 contested, 9 clearances, 4 marks, 1 goal, 1 with the 12 score involvements and the 2 tackles. But I like the 3 that I've gone with. The 1 vote I've given to Jason Horne-Francis. 20 disposals at 75%, 9 of those were contested. He had 376 metres gained, 6 clearances, 7 marks, 3 goals, 1, 9 score involvements and 2 tackles. Best year I've seen him have, and I know he's still early on in his career, but I think if he stays on the trajectory he is in, especially with players like Butters and Rosé around him, he could become a force in the AFL if he just tightened up his aggression and his anger kind of issues that I think do have him misplaced in some situations, and I hate that he is still getting away with rolling the shoulder and ducking the head and getting so many free kicks. He is actually leading the free kick count for individual players this year from all the head-high free kicks he has managed to escape with. Definitely something that needs to be tightened up. The AFL need to start paying that holding the ball instead of allowing them to get away with it. The 2 votes for me this week went to Zach Butters. 33 disposals at 84%, 9 contested, 332 metres gained, 6 clearances, 10 marks, 1 goal, 8 score involvements and 3 tackles. But it was the captain, Connor Rozee. 36 disposals at 72%, 14 contested for 515 metres gained, 7 clearances, 5 marks, 1 goal 2, 1 goal assist, 7 score involvements and 8 tackles. That is how you come out and lead your team to an emphatic win. Down at GMHBA Stadium Saturday afternoon, if you were a Hawthorn fan, you would have been going into this game within a lot of optimism and hope. And myself as a neutral, had a lot of hope as well, because what Hawthorn has been producing has been great to watch, and the climb they have had is something that some people I don't think saw coming at all. On the flip side, Geelong needed to start winning games like this in order to press their case for a premiership tilt, and they won by 51 points in an outcome that I honestly didn't see coming. I tipped Geelong, but I thought it would only be a couple of goals either side. I didn't think it was going to be this big of a win, and I didn't think it was going to be a game that was, yet again, just like the Port Adelaide Bulldogs game, going to be over at quarter time. 4 goals 5, playing 1 goal 1. You could argue that Hawthorn had a case to come back, but then when you look at the disparity by halftime, 9 goals 7 to 4 goals 3, really starts to put question marks in your mind. Just like the Bulldogs, Hawthorn have been putting on some brilliant performances. I'm stumbling over my words, I apologise. They've been putting on some really brilliant performances, and it's the inconsistencies of being able to transition that each and every week that has let them down. But still, if you were a Hawthorn fan, you would have to be so stoked with how they have played this year. And even with losses like this, you can take wins out of it, whether they be big, whether they be small. This is a club that was expected to be bottom 4, bottom 5, not contending for finals at all. They are currently in a position where they are within reach of a top 5 finish statistically. That is huge for a rebuilding club like Hawthorn that I felt was still probably a couple of years off. They're pushing probably a little bit earlier than people expected, and that's scary, because once these guys find a cohesiveness and they start putting more wins together like they have been this year, they can be one of those teams that rise up to the top and starts getting reward for effort in the way that all these young kids are getting exposed to the game. And I've been saying it for weeks and weeks and weeks, that all the Hawthorn youngsters are going to be better for the exposure they have had early. When you've got teams like Melbourne, like Geelong, like Port Adelaide, West Coast, those teams that have a lot of older players, Collingwood, once all those older players drop out and it's left to the youth, Hawthorn automatically jump up into a position where you're looking at a top 4, top 5 team based on the talent of the youth that they have got. That is a scary prospect to think about, especially given, as I've just said, they've been stringing some really good wins together this year. Geelong came out and did what they had to do, pressed their case. They have been winning some very important games without Tom Hawkins. I don't know whether they can win a premiership without Tom Hawkins, but huge win for Geelong. And I think Hawthorn would still take a lot away from this game. I really do. Especially with some of the efforts from individual players from Hawthorn. James Worpel has 26 disposals, 7 clearances, 7 tackles. He only ran at 65% disposal efficiency, but still defensively was very great around the ground. Dylan Moore, 26 disposals, only ran at 65%, but he kicked a couple of goals, 6 tackles as well. Jarman Impey has 5 tackles on the game. Connor McDonald lays 4 tackles, takes 8 marks. So these players, they're all getting involved. They're all staying relevant. However, with as big of a win as they had, the 3-2-1 this week do go to Geelong players, and I'm giving the 1 vote to a player that not many people have spoken about out of this round, but I feel needs a lot of attention. And I felt when he got drafted, And I was actually disappointed that Richmond didn't pick this guy up. I know he's mature aged and probably fits Geelong's demographic more than Richmond's. But Sean Manor and the performance that he put on in the VFL last year really opened up my eyes to a prospect of a small to medium player that can play a midfield role, can go forward, has a lot of X factor about him, being able to kick goals, laying a lot of tackles, defensive pressure through the roof, and he demonstrated that in this game and probably pushed a case for the fact that he probably should have been in Geelong's best 22 all year with the performance that he has had this week. He had 20 disposals at 75% disposal efficiency. 9 of those were contested. He ran at 318 metres gained, 3 clearances and 3 marks, kicked 2 behind, so didn't hit the scoreboard as much as he should have given his opportunity, but 8 score involvements and a game-high 14 tackles. He at one point was on key to lay a tackle record with how many tackles he was just popping up and laying everywhere. In a game, I know the game was done and dusted early, but for a player to still come out and lay as many tackles as he was and still lay that defensive pressure when your team is winning by a sizable margin, when other players might drop off a little bit because of that margin between those teams, I thought was very incredible to watch. Up until the final siren, he was all about laying pressure, and I think he deserves to be discussed when it comes to talking about Geelong's best in this particular week. The second best, the 2 voter, I gave to Jeremy Cameron. He did only run at 52% disposal efficiency, don't get me wrong, but he had 19, 5 of those were contested, 485 metres gained. He took 8 marks for the game, 4 goals for, 13 score involvements and 2 tackles. Now, obviously, the 8 score involvements he had were his own, but he still manages to find a way to get his teammates involved. Kicking 4 goals for, he could have easily kicked 6 or 7, and he probably should have. But there's no mistaking when Geelong are up and about, Jeremy Cameron is always in the conversation for one of their best, and he's always had a big hand in that win. And the best on ground for me out of this game goes to Tom Stewart. 26 disposals at 73%, 9 contested, 352 metres gained, 3 clearances, 11 marks, 2 behinds, 10 score involvements and 5 tackles. He has made recently a little bit of a move into the midfield because opposition teams have been tagging him out of the game defensively, and Chris Scott's trying to find a way to still use him around the ground and kind of take that tag out of that defensive line, and throwing him into the midfield has worked because he's getting his hand on the ball, he's getting some clearances, he's great with ball in hand, his footy IQ is one of the best in the game, without question. So seeing him in that role, really interesting to see if they persist with that moving forward, because I actually do think, even though, you know, he's a 5-time All-Australian defender, having that transition into the midfield could add a layer to his game and could make him a more damaging player. Probably better suited as an intercept defender, but when he has had the opportunity to transition into that midfield, he's looked incredibly good. GWS versus Carlton at Giants Stadium Saturday night gave us what was one of the best games of the round as well, especially given the finish and just the adrenaline that would have been running through all the players and the contested ball and how much the game swayed. This was huge. At quarter time, GWS went in at 3 goals 1 behind 8 goals 4. It looked like Carlton had them done and absolutely dusted. Then, surprisingly, GWS come out and they make it a 2-point ball game. 10 goals 2 playing 10 goals 4. At that point in time, I thought, fuck, GWS are going to put the foot down here and they are going to run away with this game. And at 3/4 time, I thought it was game over because Carlton only managed to notch up 8 points for the quarter, whereas GWS came out and kicked 7 goals 4. It was one of the most dominant 3/4 performances I've seen from a team all year. And then on the flip side, in the final quarter, GWS only managed to kick the 1 goal 2, and Carlton come home and managed to kick 5 goals 2, bringing it back to a 12-point margin. It was a game that seesawed, and it looked like it was over, and then it came back, and then it looked game over for the other team, and then it came back. One of the biggest seesawing affairs that we have seen all season, and one of the best games I feel we have seen all season as well. This game, if you were a Carlton supporter, if you were a GWS supporter, if you were a neutral, it gave something for everyone. This was a brilliant fucking game to watch. And when you look at the player stats and how much of an influence every person had, there were people standing up left, right, and center. I could not get around how big some players were. But then on the flip side, there were some players that failed to deliver in a very big way. I mean, Charlie Curnow, he had 8 disposals at 50%. He only had 3 marks. He only kicked 1 goal, 2. Harry Mackay, he kicks 5. He ran at 90%, but he only had 11 disposals. This is a player who I feel could and should be in vote calculation this week because he kicked 5 goals. But when you look at the efforts of some of the other players that just squashed that in comparison, it just shows the disparity of where some players are at. And you think, Trent, he kicked 5 goals. He should be within the conversation of at least 1 vote. And I agree with that. But the 1 vote I did give, I gave it to Brent Daniels. And now you break down the disparity here. Now, Harry had 11 at 90% and he kicked 5. Brent Daniels might have only ran at 51%, but he had 29 disposals. He took 5 marks. He had 2 goal assists, 10 score involvements, 11 tackles. It is his ability to bring other people into the game, lay big tackles when they counted, and be around all the time, as opposed to Harry only really stepping up in moments. That's where I think the disparity came. If Harry had been in every single quarter and he had slot goals every quarter when they were needed, I would probably argue a case for him to get the 1 vote this week. But the fact that Brent Daniels was there throughout the whole game, laying tackles, setting up his teammates, didn't use the ball incredibly well by hand. Okay, let's face the facts. But the 3 clearances, 5 marks, he had 3 behinds. He could have easily kicked a couple of goals. Some of those were a little bit wayward. But I just thought his ability to bring his teammates into the game in a close contest, laying defensive pressure in a close contest, gets him over the line for the 1 vote for me this week. Other players that were probably stiff to miss, Callan Ward ran at 80% with 30 disposals, took 8 marks and kicked 2 goals. De Koning had a big game in the ruck. He had 24 disposals, only at 62% though. Had 19 hitouts, 11 clearances of his own, 8 score involvements, 5 tackles. I love ruckmen that get involved with their own clearances. Tom De Koning's going to be a force to be reckoned with. He's going to end up being one of the best, if not the best ruck in the competition once he hits his peak. Sam Walsh, very quiet this game. 22 disposals at only 50%. Very down on the output that we are used to seeing him play with. And the big omission for me is probably Tom Green. Led the way on 33 disposals, only at 63% though. 14 of those were contested. 6 clearances, 4 marks, 1 goal, 8 score involvements and 5 tackles. A great resume, but again, missed out on the votes. Who I did give the 2 vote to, and a lot of people are going to question now the fact that I have not included Harry Mackay. I might do a pivot here, and I've never done a pivot. I've never done a voting pivot live, but if I don't give Harry Mackay a vote for 5, can I justify giving Jesse Hogan a vote for 5? Oh, I don't think I can. I don't think I can. You know what? We're doing a live pivot. We're going against what I have done. I'm going to give the 1 vote to Harry Mackay for kicking 5. I am going to give Jesse Hogan the 2 votes. He originally had my 3, but I'm going to give him 2. In a game where he had 15 disposals at 66%, 9 effective, 245 metres gained, 9 marks, 5 goals, 7 score involvements, and 5 tackles. And the best on ground, which is now going to shift my overall placing of this player, and I'm going to have to adjust it accordingly, is Patrick Cripps. 33 disposals at 81%, 21 were contested, 371 metres gained, 11 clearances, 2 goals, 9 score involvements, and 4 tackles. Saturday night rounded out at Optus Stadium with Fremantle hosting Richmond. Now, this was a game where I, again, knew that Fremantle were going to win, but I always go into every game with optimism that Richmond could pull something out of the hat because, again, Fremantle have had a year where, just like the Bulldogs, just like GWS to a certain extent, just like Essendon, play really good one week, the next week, kind of sheet. So we kind of have come to expect that there could be a game where Fremantle fumble, and we have come to expect from Richmond, especially when Richmond are down, they can pull a rabbit out of a hat and, for lack of better words, pull something out of their asshole and deliver something that we didn't see coming. And I was optimistic up until half time. I mean, quarter time, 4 goals, 3 plays, 2 goals straight. I thought, yeah, it's only a couple of goals. Then at half time, 7 goals, 5 plays, 3 goals, 5. It's only 4 goals. We can come back. And then we were down by 8 goals. And then we end up losing by 51 points. And I feel that margin isn't a reflection of where Richmond is at. Very similarly to, when we lost to Carlton by 60 points, I felt the scoreboard didn't reflect how well Richmond did play. And I feel this scoreboard didn't reflect that either, because when you break down the statistics of this game, Richmond were incredibly well placed. And it was hard as a Richmond supporter, 51 points down, to be hearing the contested numbers and the statistics of this game rattled off by the commentary team. Richmond had 135 contested possessions to 133, so they won the contested game by two disposals. All right, big deal to some, but they had 10 more hitouts. They had more clearances. They had 2 less centre clearances, but they dominated almost by 10 in the stoppage clearances. This is a Richmond team that is notorious for coughing up clearance. We've never been a clearance winning team. Fremantle this season are one of the best clearance teams in the comp. So to see Richmond do as well as they did in this game, statistically, it kind of breaks my soul a little bit to say, yeah, but we still lost by 50 points. And this is where I've mentioned already in this podcast, you've got to take the little wins, especially if you're supporting a team that has fallen off and it's gone wayward from what you're used to expecting. You've got to find reason to be happy. And moving into the round 18 podcast that'll drop tomorrow, that's the kind of optimism that I'm taking out of the Richmond GWS outcome as well. You've got to take the wins where you can. A lot of people have been very bullish on Adam Uze, especially the Richmond fans. Now, there's been conjecture, again, this will be spoken about in the next podcast too, about Richmond being the worst fair weather supporters in the competition, eating their own, everything else. I've got opinions about that. But a lot of people have been throwing Adam Uze under the bus, and I don't understand why, because the way I look at it and the way I vocalized it on social media is, if you go out and you buy a puzzle, and that puzzle is missing 2 or 3 pieces, you're never going to have a finished puzzle at the end of the day. I feel Adam Uze has been trying to not only build a puzzle with missing pieces, but he's had to put pieces in the incorrect spot. So not only is the puzzle incomplete, the puzzle's a little bit fucked up and doesn't look as good as it should. We haven't had a forward structure where players can work cohesively together. We've had to take Noah Bolter, who I've always viewed as a future All-Australian fullback, and play him as a full forward. We haven't had our core midfield group in together at one given time. We've had to rely on blooding so many kids and playing so many players this year. When Jacob Blight played his first game a couple of weeks ago, he was the 41st Richmond player to take to the field this year. That is insane. But again, comparatively, it shows how far off Richmond is, because Collingwood have had just as many injuries and have still managed to stay thereabouts with the rest of the pack, whereas Richmond have fallen. And I don't know where you got to draw the marker for how far it's going to go, but I definitely feel throwing Adam Uze under the bus in his first year when he hasn't had everybody readily available is incredibly harsh. I'm just looking forward to a draft or a trade period where we hit hard, we get in some youth. If we can maintain some players, I think that'd be great. Talk is that Shea Bolton's management has told Richmond he is staying, he's not going anywhere. That's fantastic. Neil Baum has come out this week and said that he is optimistic that Dustin Martin and Liam Baker both stay at Richmond. I think that might be just a kind of deter the media from talking about Richmond at the time. I definitely feel Liam Baker at the very least is gone. I think Jack Graham is gone to either Port Adelaide or Adelaide at the end of the year. There will be some delistings. I think Marlon Pickett will probably be in the discussion. Camden McIntosh might be in the discussion. But Uze has earmarked Prestia and Lynch as necessary players, at least for their leadership. So it'd be interesting because Prestia and Lynch have spent most of their seasons over the last couple of years out injured. So it'd be very interesting to see how the off-season for Richmond plays out. On the flip side, Fremantle's premiership window has gone from probably closed at the start of the year to wide open. And I don't see how they can't finish a top 4 team this year. And I don't see how they don't push for top 4 consecutive years, or at least for the next few years, because when they play good football, fuck, they look good, and they have kept the right players. They have had players leave the club, but they have managed to keep their hands on the players that they feel are necessary for that premiership tilt. They've let Chera go, they've let Henry go, they've let some other players go, but they've kept the ones that they think they need to hang tough with, and they're getting reward for effort for doing so. This week, it was really hard to pick my best on. There was a few players that could have been in the mix, and I'm giving the one vote to a player that probably a lot of people wouldn't anticipate me giving the one vote to, given that Richmond lost by 51 points, but the one vote is going to go to a Richmond player this week, which is something I don't usually do. As a Richmond man, I don't usually go into a game going, I'm going to give a Richmond player a vote, but I thought this player played a very good game and deserves to be within the conversation. Players that didn't make the cut, and now that I'm looking at it, no, I had justification as to why. Caleb Sarong had 27 disposals, but he only ran at 50%, and that is why I didn't really include him in the mix. Although he did have 7 clearances, he had 6 score involvements and laid 2 tackles. So defensively, he was down, and he didn't use the ball as well as we're used to seeing him use it. He was rather quiet on the night. Jordan Clark had 26 at 80%, 510 metres gained, took 7 marks, but only had the 3 score involvements and the 2 tackles, and we're used to seeing a lot of more defensive pressure from him as well. Luke Ryan only had 6 marks for the game. Yeah, this is a guy that absolutely destroyed us at the MCG at the start of the year. He had 23 at 82%, might have been in the conversation for the one vote, but the one vote that I gave out this week goes to Toby Nankervis. And while I couldn't justify giving Caleb Sarong a one vote, even though he ran at 50% and Toby Nankervis ran at 50% as well, he ran at 50% with 21 contested of the 26, 36 hitouts with 11 clearances of his own boot, 4 marks, 1 goal, 6 score involvements, and 7 tackles for the game. When 9 tackles for the game is your best, then for the game completely, and your ruckman comes out and manages to lay the 3rd most amount of tackles on the game, is amongst one of the best score involvement players on the game, monsters the hitouts against Luke Jackson, and I believe Sean Darcy still played this game as well before he got subbed out. Yeah, so he had more hitouts than both Jackson and Sean Darcy combined. He had more clearances than both of those ruckmans combined. When you look at the stats for the game, Toby Nankervis had 4 more clearances than any other player on the field. I thought he was huge, and he's having a huge year for Richmond. So I wanted to kind of just congratulate him by giving him the one vote. The 2 votes I gave to Josh Tracy. Now, this is an interesting prospect. I feel Fremantle have been missing a full forward with capabilities that Josh Tracy has shown since Matthew Pavlich retired. They haven't had that figurehead that you could definitively say the future is going to be built around this kid. Because even though Jai Amos is a really good young talent, this year he's been incredibly wayward in front of goal and still needs time to bulk up and all that kind of stuff, but he's still very young, so there's still plenty of time for that. But Josh Tracy was so hard to stop in this game. 16 disposals at 75%, 3 of those contested, 484 metres gained. He had 6 hitouts, 9 marks, 5 goals straight, and 7 score involvements. Now, where he would be a more dominant player is if he was to get his hands on some clearance work when he was doing the rucking, where he could lay some tackles, maybe hit up some goal assists as well. But when you're looking at him as a figurehead and he's marking everything that you're kicking to him, he's a dead eye on goal. I think he's the most accurate kick on goal in the AFL this year. he is a scary prospect, and I've been kind of floating the idea in my head that if Shea Bolton or Liam Baker were to go to Fremantle, that Richmond should target Josh Tracy as a potential key target to bring to Richmond, because we need that full forward. Tom Lynch is going to stay with us forever. We need somebody who can kick goals. But I think Josh Tracy is popping up just at the right time for Fremantle for them to lock him away long term. And with him having a season he has, he's only going to improve. Scary prospect. He's a future Coleman medalist, Josh Tracy. I'm calling it now. Best on ground for me was Andrew Brayshaw. Hard to stop around the contest. 35 disposals at 65%. 11 of those were contested at 65% disposal efficiency. 417 metres gained. 6 clearances, 8 marks, 1 goal, 1 goal assist, 8 tackles, and 10 score involvements. Again, he was just propping up at all the right times. The defensive efforts from him was huge. He brought his teammates into the game. He racked up a lot of the ball. He'll easily get the 3 vote for this game if Josh Tracy doesn't get it for kicking his 5. Unfortunately, the tale of the tape of games over at quarter time continued, with Melbourne taking on West Coast in, I think, a performance that a lot of people probably expected to come. At quarter time, 7 goals 3, played 1 goal 2. That transitioned into 11 goals 5 to 3 goals 4 at half time. 14 goals 9, played 6 goals 8 leading into the last break, with a total of 17-10, 112, defeating 8-10, 58. Yeah, again, a game where in the second half, probably more contested, given you've got the fact that West Coast go on to kick 5 goals 6 for the rest of the game versus the 6 goals 5 that Melbourne end up kicking. But it was, again, a game that was over so early that West Coast were chasing tail, and as hard as they tried, it was just always going to be out of reach. And again, was a game that was thereabouts for some players and not good enough for others. And on, you know, 2 teams on flip sides of the spectrum. We didn't expect big things from West Coast this year, so in many retrospects, with no disrespect to West Coast, they have probably outperformed expectation this year by winning the amount of games that they have won. And Melbourne really needed to solidify some wins at this point of the year, given that they're still in contention, but so many teams around them are in the same boat, that they need to really start pushing the point that they can win games without Petrarca. You know, that, you know, when a teammate like Max Gawn gets subbed out of the game like he did this week, and he didn't play in round 18, they need to start finding belief in the fact that they can play without the best ruckman in the comp. You know, so without your 2 best, can you win games? This is the statement they need to make. They made that statement this week. Do they follow up in round 18? I know they do, you know they do. But it was a must-win game. As silly as it sounds, West Coast could have come up and did some damage, because we've seen West Coast play out of their skin in some games this year, but Melbourne were way too good on the day. Way too good. And the votes for this game probably going to blow some people's minds, because these are names that you probably wouldn't expect to see popping up. Probably one of those names, maybe, given that he does have impact on the scoreboard. You know, there were some half-decent individual efforts, like Oscar Allen only ran at 50%, but he had 4 goals 3 from a 10 disposal game. You know, he'll find his form. He plays a certain role, so only having 10 touches as a key forward might not be a big day, but he still manages to kick 7 scores. So accuracy needs to be cleaned up, but he'll clean that up with time. Jack Viney, 18 disposals, but at 38%. He was really dirty on this game. Harley Reid had 16 at 62%, laid 7 tackles. Judd McVie had a good game for Melbourne, 22 at 72%, had 5 marks, 4 score involvements. Ed Langdon had 8 score involvements from 22 disposals. Tom McDonald had 22 at 86%, took 7 marks, 8 score involvements. The one that's probably a little bit stiff to miss is Christian Salem. 23 disposals at 87%, 7 contested, 8 marks, 7 score involvements, and 2 tackles. The one vote I gave for this game was Jacob Van Ruin. He had 14 disposals at 64%, 8 contested, 295 metres gained, 5 hitouts, 9 marks, 4 goals 4, 10 score involvements, and 2 tackles. Again, probably harsh to reward one that kicks 4 over the other, but I think given the circumstances, one in a team that wins by 50 odd points and one in a losing outfit that only kicks 8. You effectively kick half your team score. Easier to pick one over the other when there's an even spread and you're dominant in an even spread. The 2 vote goes to Caleb Windsor, who I thought probably played one of his best games of the season. 25 disposals at 68%, 10 contested at 492 metres gained, 4 clearances, 7 marks, 1 goal, 7 score involvements and 5 tackles. And best on ground to a player that has made a defensive midfield kind of shift, and I'm really digging it. Trent Rivers, 29 disposals, 79%, 8 contested for 609 metres gained, 7 clearances, 9 marks, 9 score involvements, and 5 tackles. You could probably raffle between him and Caleb Windsor, who was best on ground for this game, but I really loved the effort of Trent Rivers from start to finish. Marvel Stadium, Sunday afternoon. Talk about an upset, and if you were Logan McDonald, you would be fucking spewing. Back-to-back weeks, you've got a kick to win the game, and back-to-back weeks, you shank it. I feel sorry for the bastard, I really do, but he has become a meme over the last 3 weeks. This game was tied at quarter time. It was then blown out to a 4-goal margin the way of Sydney, and at 3/4 time, even though it was only, maybe 3-4 goals, maybe was it? No, it was only 23 points, so it was effectively 4 goals. You would have thought at that given time, Sydney had a stranglehold on that game. And to think St Kilda managed to pull the proverbial rabbit out of the hat with Sydney only going on in that last quarter to kick 5 behinds against St Kilda coming out and managing to put on 4 goals 2 to pinch the win. I'm still shocked. I'm still shocked this happened. Sydney have lost 3 games this year, all of which have been under a 5-point margin. They have lost to Fremantle, they have lost to St Kilda, and they have lost to Richmond. And it has all been within a kick. I still can't get my head around it. Again, Logan McDonald had a chance to kick the winning goal, kicks it behind instead, and you could see that it was written all over his face. It was so hard to watch as a neutral for him because my heart broke for him against Fremantle. And then to see it happen again the following week, I thought you couldn't be fucking serious, really. But the loss here, the 2-point win for St Kilda, wasn't the biggest talking point out of this game because we saw Izak Heeney rubbed out for Brownlow contention. Now, probably at this point of the season, he has underperformed a bit to the point where other players have probably taken the lead over him. I mean, in my MVP votes, he is still leading. I think it is very close to being overtaken, though. You'll see that at the end of the video. But to see him rubbed out for a fist that he threw backwards to maybe just gain a little bit of space, which accidentally caught Jimmy Webster high, drew a little blood from the nose, no concussion, no anything like that. He cops a week ban. And this is where the point I made earlier with Zirk Thatcher throwing a fist back and knocking out Aaron Norton, subbed out with a concussion. How he can go unsighted, but Heeney gets a week for just a blood nose. Even to the point where after Heeney did the action, he kind of stops for a second or two to make sure Webster's okay after realizing what he's done. So it was a purely accidental move. The AFL argued in the tribunal hearing that the contact was accidental, but then went on to argue that being accidental doesn't matter, and they upheld it, even though they fought for it to get overturned. I thought it was a bit rough, even though I do feel punches off the ball need to be mandated and taken out of the game. But again, you have an accidental fist off the ball that rubs out Izak Heeney for possible Brownlow win, but you've got players earlier this year like Scott Pendlebury, Zach Butters, who have thrown punches off the ball that have gotten a fine, or they've gotten away with it. And I don't understand where the disparity is, and it's caused a lot of talk within the AFL community this week. I don't want to get too ahead of myself. I'm going to put a pause on that. We're going to turn our attention to the players who outperformed in this particular game. There were a few. This was a game, always in tight contests, you are always going to have players stand tall, and there was one player in particular that probably doesn't get his just desserts, but I thought he played incredibly well. But the one vote for me in this game does go to Izak Heeney. 24 disposals at 66%, 11 contested, 444 meters gained, 2 clearances, 5 marks, 2 goals, 10 score involvements and 4 tackles. Still getting up and about as he usually does. Stiff to miss, probably a few. I mean, Chad Warner goes at 87% with 23, he has 9 score involvements. Ollie Florent had 24 at 75% with 5 score involvements as well. Errol Goulden had 7 score involvements and 3 tackles with 28 disposals, but ran at 67%. Jack Sinclair had a half-decent game. Naziah Wengaleen Malira had a half-decent game. But the 2 and the 3, I think, are quite comprehensive. The 2 probably a little bit left wing for some, but I went with Callum Wilkie. 26 disposals at 92%, 4 contested, 484 metres gained, had 14 marks defensively in a game that comes down to a 2-point margin. To have 14 marks where most of those were intercepted is a huge game for a defender. Had the 1 score involvement and laid 4 tackles. So defensively, an absolute beast in this game. And the best on ground I gave to Jack Sinclair. No, I did not. I gave it to Jack Steele. I apologise. We just said Jack Sinclair missed out. Jack Steele gets the 3 votes. 28 disposals at 71%, 14 contested, 186 metres gained. Didn't gain much, a lot of chipping around with the handballs. 4 clearances, 7 marks, 5 score involvements and 7 tackles. You could probably flip him and Cal Wilkie for best on if you really wanted to, but I still feel Jack Steele's defensive work around the contest goes incredibly underrated in the AFL as an absolute whole. And the final game of the round was at the Gabba in an absolute arm wrestle. I thought this was going to be a smashing, but it turned out to be a really good game. In a game where Adelaide came home and put the absolute fear in Brisbane, but Brisbane managed to walk away with an 11-point win. At quarter time, 2-goal margin the way of Brisbane saw them 26-14. At halftime, it was only a couple of goals again, 54-39. The margin blew out a little bit, 79-59, 20 points at three-quarter time. And you probably would have thought then, given the momentum, given the start to the last quarter, Brisbane come out and kick the next couple of goals. You probably thought it was game over. But Adelaide started charging home, and the final score was 14-13 to 13-8. Again, though, the inaccuracy of Brisbane could be their undoing come finals, because they should be putting hammer to the absolute sword when it comes to games like this, especially with a team that is fighting for top 4, that is fighting for top 8 with so many teams still vying for those spots. They need to be putting teams like Adelaide away. But as a neutral supporter, to round the round out with this contest, couldn't have asked for a better finish. This game had me on the edge of my seat, and I don't even support either of those teams. Statistically, easy to pick out, I feel, the best on ground, second best on ground, and probably raffle a few for the 1 vote. But I'm going to go with these 3. Feel free to argue with me. There's really not much to talk about out of this game. There was nothing untoward. Nothing that was reported upon, no big injuries. It was just an absolute slog between 2 teams, and I loved it. I really love it. I love close contest, and I love when 2 teams just throw everything at the ball until the final siren. The 1 vote for me goes to Ben Keys. 14 disposals at 71% disposal efficiency, 8 contested for 294 metres gained, 2 clearances, 4 marks, 4 goals, 7 score involvements and 2 tackles. 4 goals in a close contest, I think, is huge. There were a few players that, kicked a handful, but, Cam Rayner, for example, comes out and kicks 3. But I thought Keys for Adelaide was very monumental when they needed somebody to stand tall to stem that margin. And he is one of those players that tends to pop up for Adelaide when they need somebody to pop up. The 2 vote, very comfortably for me, was Josh Dunkley. 35 disposals at 71%, 14 contested for 478 metres gained, 7 clearances, 8 marks, 1 goal, 4 score involvements and 5 tackles. but best on ground, and dare I say, could this guy be making a charge for his third Brownlow medal? I think it'll be a close finish. Lachie Neale, 36 disposals at 77%, 18 contested for 523 metres gained, 10 clearances, 9 marks, 3 goals, 1 goal assist, 8 score involvements and 2 tackles. He was everywhere, especially early, and to think that the first couple of goals were collectively clicked by Lachie Neale and Josh Dunkley, 2 players that for Brisbane have hit the scoreboard but not as big as at least Lachie Neale has done in this game. One of the better games I've seen him play this year, but the last couple of months, him and Patrick Cripps I feel are going head to head for the late push for the Brownlow. You'd feel Marcus Bontempelli, Nick Dacos, Izak Heeney early on, but Cripps and Neale, I think they're going head to head and it's going to be a close finish. So at the end of round 17, this is how our AFL ladder is shaping up. We have Sydney Swans still outright leaders on 52 points, followed by Carlton, Fremantle and Essendon rounding out the top 4. We have Geelong, Port Adelaide, Brisbane and GWS rounding out the top 8. However, with that being said, within 2 games reach of the second place, mind you, we have Collingwood and Melbourne sitting on 36 points in 9th and 10th, and still within a couple of games reach of the top 8, we have the Bulldogs, Gold Coast and Hawthorn. St Kilda sit in 14th, and our bottom 4 are Adelaide, West Coast, North Melbourne and Richmond. And the big thing to note here is North Melbourne winning pushed Richmond down to 18th place, and it is the first time in an 18-team competition that Richmond has ever finished a round dead last, and it now also means that since being an 18-team competition, every single team has sat in 18th spot at any given time at least once. So at least Richmond having as bad of a year as we have, we're still making history. That's something to cling on to, right? And as always, before we wrap up the podcast, it is time to turn our attention to the top 10 currently for my MVP award for the 2024 season. And there has been a bit of shifting, especially after I just mentioned that I ran the gauntlet and changed my votes live with the Carlton GWS game. And some people, again, are still going to disagree with the votes I give out and how people are currently sitting. And in reflection over the last couple of weeks, I have stated that I've probably underappreciated the year Cripps has had a little bit, and the votes do reflect that. But again, gives discussion point for you guys at home and myself to have a talk in the comments down below. But currently sitting in 10th place on 15 votes collectively, we have Jack Steele, Errol Goulden, and Izak Rankine. On 16 votes in 9th place, we have Sam Walsh. In 8th place, on 17 votes, we have Adam Treloar. In 7th place, on 19 votes, we have Patrick Cripps. And in 6th place, on 20 votes, we have Marcus Bontempelli. The top 5, definitively, each and every member of the top 5 on their own amount of votes, because we've had ties in the top 5 for most of the year this year. In 5th place, we have Lachie Neale on 21 votes. In 4th place, we have Caleb Sarong on 22 votes, having a very underappreciated year, I feel. In 3rd place, on 25 votes, we have Nick Dacos. In 2nd place, with 28 votes, we have Zach Merritt. Again, I feel a Brownlow smoky. And in 1st place, on 31 votes, clinging on for dear life, is Izak Heeney, who I don't know whether I was kissing him on the dick early on the start of the season and disregarding others, but I still feel he had a really hot start to the year, which gave him a huge gap on everyone else. But since then, a lot of players have been closing that gap. Merritt, Dacos, Sarong, Lachie Neale, Bontempelli, Patrick Cripps. Patrick Cripps probably should be 5 votes higher than what he currently is, easily, if I look back in reflection. But I feel the Brownlow at this point in the season is going to be wide open, and it's probably going to be the closest run we have had in recent years. Dare I say, could we have another tie? It's been a while. Are we shaping up for one? I think we might. But that is it for this video. Do hope you guys enjoyed. As I said, tomorrow I will drop the round 18 podcast, and then Friday morning you'll get my tips ahead of round 19, and I will get the podcast for round 19 out at the start of the week, and then we're back on track. We're finally running the gauntlet and we're going good. I want to thank some of you guys as well for letting me know in the comments of the last video some ideas that you'd like to see for content that you'd like me to make. The idea of doing a mock draft has been floated, and I really love the idea of that. The suggestion of doing a trade period podcast is something I'm definitely going to do, whether it be a chat daily or every couple of days talking about a player movement, talking about who I feel should be traded, players that are officially traded, things like that. So please, do continue to let me know in the comments down below if you have ideas for content you would like to see me make. While you're down there, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. It goes a long way to helping myself out, and you'd be jumping on board the community we are starting to build here slowly but steadily, and I appreciate every single one of you that has done all of those things so far. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here, and as always, I will catch you guys next time.